Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by the Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Nicole Reiner.
And I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
So today we're going to be sharing our interview with composer Robert McClure. Elizabeth, did you learn anything shocking or exciting from this interview?
I got some interesting fact about octopus.
Yeah. So for octopus fans who are listening, I still don't feel confident using a plural, so I'll let you be in charge of that. But animal fans or octopus fans, I didn't realize that he wrote so much about animals. And you know, I didn't realize that the piece that won FNMC's competition, Writhe Unfurled, was about an octopus. Did you?
I didn't either, and that made me like it more.
Yeah. I hope he puts it in the score actually, so that people will know this. But it you know what it made me think of? I mean, I'm a big fiction fan, and I usually get my ideas about what new books I want to read from like New York Times reviews and things like that. And so a lot of times it'll be this really thorough review or an interview with the author. And so I've long known that authors will go down these wormholes of research and kind of living in their fictional characters while they're writing a book. You know, so even though it's just a made up story, they'll decide there are some details that they have to really research, and then they really enrich their knowledge in that way about whatever it is. And I had this sort of oh duh moment as Robert was talking, because he really went down this wormhole researching the life of the octopus, including how to make the word plural, which I didn't know was such a controversy. But you know, he did all this research because he was writing this piece on an octopus, right? And it just made me realize, like, yeah, of course composers do this too. Like, surely
they would talk about it more, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the value of getting to do these interviews, because we get to learn all kinds of non-musical cool stuff from Robert.
Robert McClure behind the scenes.
Yeah, let's dig in. Let's get to it.
Let's do it. We are here today with the 2022 winner of the Flute New Music Consortium composition competition in the flute chamber music category. Here with us today is Robert McClure, who was the composer of the flute quartet with video, Writhe Unfurl. Robert has been featured at Seamus and has participated in the Beijing Modern Music Festival. You may have heard him as the host of the Lexical Tones podcast. He has won grants with the Ohio Arts Council and can be found teaching at Ohio University. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to talk to you today and to get to know a little bit more about you and a little bit more about this fabulous quartet. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
We wanted to start with a question about the quartet. So this winning piece, Writhe Unfurl, was written for the Pandemonium 4 quartet and is paired with a video. Can you tell us a little bit about its inspiration?
Yeah. So this piece was originally kind of, it started with a discussion with my colleague, Allison Sinkoff, who is a professor of flute at Ohio University and one of the members of the Pandemonium 4 flute quartet. She said, you know, hey, we're kind of looking for some new music, and also we really like to do stuff with visuals, so you know, kind of keep that in your mind and everything. So we had a discussion about it. It was kind of slated in a time and place for me to write it in between, you know, other projects, and I started writing it, kind of working on it in about February 2020. And then, as you can imagine, I kind of lost focus a little bit on it for a while, starting about, you know, March 8th, 2020, when it seems like the entire spring of 2020, where I was in like 8 festivals and I had so many plans of all this great stuff that was going to happen, and then it all took a nosedive. So I had already written some parts of the piece, but it didn't really go anywhere for a while. I actually took a break on it, and I wrote I wrote this other piece called Flora for two saxophones. And it was during that piece that I kind of like got going again into writing. And I finished this in July of 2020. And then the video was finished probably October of 2020 because it was premiered, I believe, October 24th, 2020, I think. Is that right? That sounds right.
Sounds right.
Sounds very official.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
It might be right. I don't know. Actually, it might have been 2021. I can't remember at this
Oh
point.
no.
But when it was premiered, I think it might. Yeah, it was definitely later. Anyway, so the inspiration for it, I love watching nature documentaries. I can't remember when Blue Planet 2 came out, the BBC documentary about ocean life and everything, but I was just like, oh my gosh, this is stunning. And I have become very enamored with the octopus, and it is a fascinating animal. And I really wanted to do something with this piece because it's four members of a same family of instruments, and I wanted to do something kind of like that was about the octopus. And so that was the initial idea for it, was that the quartet was going to kind of act as this four fluted individual almost. Everything is kind of locked together, but also each individual has its own specific movements. And as I was kind of researching about the octopus in terms of like getting inspiration to write this piece, I learned that only about a third of the neurons in the octopus are in its like brain. Two-thirds, or maybe I'm misremembering that fact, but it's a humongous number of the octopus's brain that lives in its tentacles. So its tentacles truly have a mind of their own. And it was that kind of fact and the like kind of very dynamic, quick movements that an octopus can make, in addition to some of the tentacles being very flowy and agile, while others are kind of like more twitchy and dynamic, and they can be very fast. Obviously, they're very intelligent animals, and I think it was also this idea that if you look back through evolution, the octopus and the strain, like the tree of evolutionary life that we got onto, diverged so long ago that you have intelligence on obviously our side, but then you have this completely separate intelligence that evolved in parallel with the octopus. I mean, it says, they say like most octopuses are have the equivalent intelligence of about a third grader.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just incredible, so it was basically, I wanted to write a piece about octopuses, and this is what it came out.
I really love that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Elizabeth, are you guys soulmates?
We might be. Robert,
bird person,
you may not know this, but I have a penchant for odd and oddly shaped animals. It is right now manifesting itself in birds. But I do love a good octopus anecdote. So we're going to go off script here, and I'm going to ask, what is your favorite octopus fact that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I mean, I think I kind of already shared it in the fact that the majority of their brain is in their tentacles. Obviously, there's the whole thing of like they can basically fit through anything as long as their beak can fit through it. They can fit through it. They can basically escape out of any enclosure. No matter how well like tightly sealed you think it is, they'll figure out a way to escape it. So unfortunately, they make terrible pets. Unless you're really good at like putting them in octopus jail. But the other thing, and I've already said the word several times, but the there's a lot of controversy as to how you should pluralize the word octopus.
Sure.
So because it's not Latin, a lot of people say octopi, but it's not Latin, so you shouldn't use the I. But then, so we say octopuses. Well, that's kind of the English version of it, and then like octopodes would be the Greek pluralization of it, or something like that. So I go with octopuses, but obviously there are multiple interpretations as to how you can pluralize, how you can do the pluralization for octopus. So that was a lot of facts. Choose one.
I am never going to turn down random animal facts.
It's a good learning experience already.
Mm.
Robert, can you tell us more about the video component? Like, how did you go about making that? How did that fit into your compositional process? That sort of thing?
Well, the first thing is I didn't make it, actually. It's a collaborator of mine. She and I have collaborated on several pieces before. Her name is Mare Hirsch, and she finished a doctorate out at one of the California schools that I'm not remembering at the moment, but we actually overlapped while I was doing my doctorate at Rice, and she was doing a master's also in composition at the time. And then she kind of went more the digital media route, and now she just got a tenure track job in like in media, I believe somewhere in Washington, might be Tacoma. But yeah, so one of the wonderful things about, being a composer and having, a slightly longer career at this point is you kind of collect collaborators along the way. So Mare and I started collaborating on different things while we were at Rice University together. And then since then, she has done the video for one of my older electronic, strictly electronic pieces. She took another electronic piece of mine recently and did another video for it that was kind of like a test study for what we would do in this piece. So it's all she kind of developed this method of animation, which is based on basically based on random movements in geometry. So there's like kind of we always just called it the creature that's in the video that's like moving back and forth, and it kind of like morphs in shape because she's able to control things like activity and the size and like where the virtual camera is in relative to the creature, essentially, and like kind of where it moves. But there's also a lot of kind of random programming in it, so it actually it kind of mirrors without being right on the nose an octopus. It's able to change shape, change texture, change color, and morph itself in so many different ways as it kind of moves through this like ever-changing backdrop. And so the beginning of the piece starts with this color palette that's a lot of like reds, greens, yellows, stuff like that. And then once we move into the middle of the piece, it gets more black and white. And then toward there, like halfway to 3/4 mark, we get these like really radiant blues, greens, purples, and the creature kind of like changes its activity. Towards the climax of the piece, we get right into like we're almost inside of the animation that she developed. And then towards the end, we kind of as the piece kind of recalls the quote unquote middle section, the video also goes back to that kind of black, white, gray palette. And but it was always just kind of like this thing is going to dance and twitch and writhe on the screen to accompany the activity in the flutes.
Cool. So it really is an accompaniment. Like did you finish the piece and then send it to her so that she could create the video to depict
Yes. Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. Like I had kind of, we had met during the process, and I kind of let her listen to different things, and she was working off like a MIDI file for a while, and then Pandemonium and we did a little recording session, so I was able to send her that audio to work from, and because honestly, the MIDI flutes on
Are the worst.
are just the worst.
So
And
gross.
like for whatever reason, the lowest like fifth of the bass flute wasn't even like playing. So for the longest time, I just put everything as piano, because I didn't want to hear the like terrible flute. It actually kind of depressed me, the terrible MIDI flute. So yeah, it kind of took shape slowly as we kind of workshopped the piece, and then we were kind of ready to premiere it. I am thinking we definitely did. We did a premiere without video July 2021, and then the full premiere October 2021. Yeah, I am remembering that now. It was not 2020. That seems impossible. Like, I don't think flutes were allowed to play in public at that point.
Not where I was.
Yeah, not where we were either.
Bummer. No.
Might depend on where you were living in fall of 2020.
That's also true.
Gonna just leave that there. So as you probably know, we're an organization of flutists. We anticipate that a lot of the people listening to this interview are also going to be flutists. So we were hoping you could tell us about some of your other works for flute.
Well, there aren't many, but there is actually going to be a new one pretty soon. I am one of the other members of Pandemonium 4 is Lindsay Goodman, who she teaches at several schools around the Columbus area, and she has just been a incredible friend of mine. And she, when I was starting to develop some ideas for actually another piece that didn't end up happening, I kind of just, hey, Lindsay, could we get on? At that time, it was Skype, because Zoom wasn't a thing yet, I guess. Zoom quickly became a thing, weirdly enough.
It's really a thing now. And
Skype quickly became not a thing. It just like disappeared overnight. Anyway, so she like spent 2 hours or something on Skype with me, just like answering all my flute questions, and here's how you do this extended technique, this is what you should think about when considering to do this. And I actually still have the notebook pages where I took all my notes when I was working with her. So I've had her, she in particular, she does a lot with electroacoustic music, so flute and electronics.
Yep.
And we had her as a guest at Ohio University to do most of a show of flute and electronics. And it was like during the getting coffee before the show, when she was like, all right, you wrote this flute quartet, come on, where's my piece now? So I'm going to work on a piece for alto flute and electronics, and I'm going to start that in January of 2023, and it should be done probably by April. Hopefully she will premiere it pretty soon after that. I think other than that, though, flute has always been an ensemble instrument for me. However, just recently I wrote this septet for it's basically Pierrot ensemble plus saxophone for the Code ensemble, also in Columbus. And Erin Helgeson Torres is the flute player in Code, and she and her husband Michael Rene Torres. Michael is the artistic director and conductor. He's also the saxophonist of the ensemble. He commissioned me for this piece for Code, and since they're a married couple, I wrote pretty big flute and saxophone parts for the ensemble. And Yeah, it actually it starts with flute, it ends with flute. The flute was a major source of material for that piece. And actually, Lindsay Goodman was at the premiere, and it features a lot of like kind of almost hyperventilating into the
Hmm.
flute. It's part of the concept of the piece, but it ends with like this really aggressive breathing like across the embouchure, so the tone hole. So it's kind of it ends up kind of being colored noise or colored air,
Hmm.
with a little bit of pitch. But Lindsay saw that and she was like, "Okay, you're not going to write that for me, right?" I was like, "No, I got it out of my system. I'm good." But Aaron just absolutely nailed it, and yeah, so this was definitely the first like solo all flute venture I had ever taken. It seems like so many composers always have a solo flute piece, right?
Yeah, we've noticed.
Yeah, I don't, weirdly enough.
What's up
I,
with that?
I don't know. I really don't. I remember when I was just getting into my master's degree, I did write a solo flute piece. It's awful. It's not coming out of the archives. It's going to stay buried where it belongs. Did not know what I was doing at the time, but yeah, I have kind of I think the real answer is that I had a major project that was going to be like seven individual pieces that form like an evening length work,
Hmm.
and it was going to be for kind of a similar ensemble that I wrote the code piece for. And there was going to be a flute and electronics movement, and this it was going to have dance and video and all amazing types of stuff. And that project, for kind of personal reasons, fell through.
Sure.
And at the end of that, I kind of like I wanted to write the flute and electronics piece, but I kind of didn't have a performer
Hmm.
in mind to write it for, because I didn't really know Lindsay that well yet. And it was kind of the thing of like, well, I'm a very practical person. I don't really write stuff unless I am writing for someone,
Sure.
and they're going to perform it at the end of the writing process. So it kind of just the idea just kind of sat around until Lindsay and I got into more projects together, and it was like, okay, yeah, we should definitely write this piece. Yeah, so stay tuned. That's
Stay
the end.
tuned. That's the answer we like when it comes to solo flute works.
Yeah.
So you've touched on this a little bit, but a question we love to ask composers is tell us what you like about writing the flute, or maybe some things that you find challenging. Sounds like either way, both are on your mind right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the cool things about the flute is that they're, in relationship to the other woodwinds, I think there are a lot more sonic possibilities in terms of like, um, you know, non-traditional techniques or stuff like that. I think one of the hardest things though, is reminding yourself that the low range is not the most powerful range, where it is in absolutely every other woodwind. you know so it really kind of, you know the instrument, it seems like as composers we're always writing kind of like, oh yeah, we're just in the treble clef, and like in the staff, and it's like, no, a little bit higher is where it really sits, well, at least like, from a compositional standpoint, that's where you're going to get the power, that's where you're going to get a lot of the facility. um so I think that's what I like about it, is that it is so versatile as a sound, just in terms of like sound and colors and everything. um but yeah, the hardest thing is just that low end of the flute for me.
Sure.
And also, you know kind of reminding yourselves that yes, they are human, they need to breathe. um
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Always a good thing, right? And as I mean, my instrument is percussion, so breathing has never really been that much of a concern until I became a composer. And then it seems weirdly enough that in the past, I don't know, I would say like 5 or 6 years, I've written a ton of woodwind music. So it's very much on my mind now. Like, hey, breathing, it's a thing.
It is a thing.
I do have to say though, I mean, yes, thank you for considering, because the flute is such a wasteful instrument, if you want to look at it that way, that we do need to breathe more often. But you know, we're always training to deal with that and find crafty ways to work around it too. So you certainly don't need to build in huge neon signs for us all the time, you know, to the point where you can't do what you want to musically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving kind of away from the flute-centric talk, as we were preparing to meet with you tonight, I was browsing some of your other works. And I'm a sucker for a piece with a good story. So I couldn't help but notice you had some very programmatic titles. A couple of my favorites were The Paint While It's Dripping. You had a set of desert miniatures about insects that I need to check out later. And another really great title was Glue, Tape, and Other Adhesives.
That one, wow, okay.
Sticks out.
Yeah.
Pun not intended, actually.
I was
So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the wildly different soundscapes that all of those titles suggest, and maybe a little bit about where you come by your inspirations.
Yeah. As I said earlier, I'm a really big fan of nature documentaries, and I find myself, you know, gravitating towards either animal, plant, or natural subjects for, you know, for inspiration a lot. But that's not always the case. I also love, you know, abstract expressionist art from the 50s and 60s. There was a big part of my life where I was very into poetry. I have pieces that are mostly like mathematically driven. So I often like kind of, you know, there are definitely those composers out there where it's like everything must come from within. Like the music is an expression of their emotions or their thoughts or stuff like that. That really hasn't been the case for me for a long time. I usually, you know, am taking inspiration from everything that's outside of me. And I have often said that it's like I view the world with composer glasses. Like anything that I'm kind of interested in, I'm kind of slowly turning it into a musical idea. So for instance, the Desert Miniatures Insects piece, it's for 3 bassoons. And it was a commission from a friend of mine who he played in an ensemble that I needed a bassoon in while I was in my master's degree. And at the end of it, I was, you know, whatever measly, you know, tribute I could give the musicians at the time. He was like, no, just, you know, we'll figure something out later. So I actually wrote a piece for bassoon and piano specifically for him, like to honor his grandmother. And then a year later, he was like, hey, I've got this bassoon trio, and, you know, bassoon quartets are like the thing, but we're a trio and we need music. You interested? And I've got money for you too. So I was like, well, okay, yeah, let's do that. So since we had known each other while we were in Tucson, Arizona, it kind of like, okay, let's do something with the desert. And I had already written a piece for piano called Desert Miniatures, which were just kind of like scenes of the desert, you know, like the cool, how it gets cold at night, or like flowers on the tops of cactuses, they open at night.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of stuff. And for this one, I was really interested in insects, you know, desert miniatures. Tiny.
Oh, okay.
There's the joke. Anyway, so I kind of looked up all of these different insects that I thought were kind of cool. Like when we lived there, my wife and I would go hiking up in the in the mountains that surround Tucson, and at certain times of the year, you'd be walking through the tall grass, and all of a sudden, you just get bombarded with these grasshoppers that were just like you were disturbing them, and they jumped and they'd like hit you in the chest, and and they're not small animals either. Like they're like they're a grasshopper. So the first one is called the many-hued grasshopper. Then the cactus bee, who's a bee who doesn't have a hive above ground; it actually digs. There's a butterfly that has, through evolution, changed its so-called warning colors to match another butterfly that is poisonous to birds.
Mm-hmm.
It is harmless, so it has changed its pattern and its colors to resemble a poisonous bird for survival. I just thought that was fascinating. And then the last one is called the fire ant, which, if you've ever stepped on a fire ant hill, which I have, it is probably the most unpleasant thing about living in the desert.
Oh, no.
So it's very frenetic and fiery and everything. But it was really like, okay, I'm gonna look at each one of these and figure out characteristics that I can turn into music in some way. Let's see, the other ones you mentioned, the paint while it's dripping. That's actually a quote from. Let's see. Let me get this right. It is a quote by John Cage about Robert Rauschenberg in John Cage's book Silence. And the full quote is about Robert Rauschenberg. He regrets that we don't see the paint while it's dripping. Meaning that, as at least I took it to mean, Robert Rauschenberg was the art is in the process, not necessarily the product. And that piece of mine, if you look at my website, the front part of my website, you see like paint dripping down.
Mm-hmm.
So that piece is an audiovisual installation, and that paint dripping down is like part of that piece.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. That's actually another project I did with Mayor Hirsch. She was the one who filmed it. When we made the basically, I'm standing behind this canvas. I've got these 4 or 5 different colors, and I'm just choosing places to place above where the video starts, and the paint just drips down the canvas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like all blues, greens, almost black, and then to fill up the entire canvas, it takes about 45 minutes. And at about the 30-ish minute mark, there's this one strip of like very, very bright orange to kind of like offset and be like the outlier, I guess, to the piece. But the piece, it can run by itself. All the videos are kind of chopped up, and I made this this program which will show the video, and there's also audio of the sounds of like painting. So like brush against a canvas, or pulling tape off a canvas, or rattling brushes in a paint can, stuff like that. And those sounds are being randomly triggered, and it sounds like it's moving around you. There's a kind of virtual space that I create even with 2 speakers. And then the video just is constantly updating and morphing between different scenes. And it was a fun project. I actually took, while I was doing my doctorate, we had to take a class outside of music, which was the absolute best thing they could have forced us to do. And I took a modern art history class, and I was a doctoral student in basically an undergrad class, because I didn't have the training to be in anything that was more upper level than that. But the teacher was very supportive, and she instead of like making me write these papers that the undergrads were writing, she was like, well, why don't you do something that's actually meaningful to you? Why don't you do a project that is relative to what you're learning about contemporary art history? So we kind of developed this project, and that was the thing. So it's been shown a couple different places, a couple different times, but yeah. Glue tape and other adhesives. That's an old piece. It's a percussion solo, and it has all these different like metric and mathematical processes running together. And I think I just came up with the title because it was like there's nothing else holding this piece together.
I love that.
But like it was just all of this math that was holding the piece together musically. So it was like, oh well, adhesives, I guess. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Can you do one more for us?
Yeah.
Fuck face von clown stick.
I can do that. So Nicholas Phillips had this project. When was that? It was either 2019 or 2020. I can't remember.
2018 is where it is on your website.
2018. Okay, so Nick Phillips had this project called #45miniatures, and he was commissioning it. This all came out of the idea. He was talking with I don't know, some musicians and a couple composers on Facebook one night, and they like were lamenting, the president at the time and how horrible he was. And they were like, oh, you should get a bunch of people to write like miniatures about him in some way. So it belongs to that project of #45miniatures. And if you remember, when Jon Stewart was leaving, he left the Daily Show in I think 2016. And up until then, in the lead up to the the campaigns and the election, anytime that Donald Trump was mentioned, he kind of always called him fuckface von clownstick. So I thought
that
was the most hilarious way to refer to him. And it doesn't give anything away about the piece unless you know that. But it's like a 2-minute piano solo. And I did this thing that, after I mentioned there, I had a big project that kind of fell through. And after that project kind of fell through, I was kind of like, what do I do now? I'd been kind of writing in a certain way for a long time. This project was meant to be like the culmination of, this method of writing I had done in dealing with like pitch and form and stuff like that. So I've got this tiny little piece to write, and I'm like, I just got to do something different, So my wife and my father and I came up with about 33 different words that we could associate with Donald Trump. Most of them were curse words or variations, and what I did was excluding X and Z. I made a letter to pitch translation where each pitch could be represented by 2 different letters. And I put each word through that to come up with melodic ideas, or, it could be harmony or something like that. So the piece itself is a collection of 13 words that I associate with Donald Trump. And each of them has their own pitch material to represent them. Formally, each word takes up a number of quarter note beats that are based on the number of the letter in the alphabet. So, A would be 1 beat, B would be 2 beats, C would be 3 beats, so on and so forth. And I got it so that there are 144 beats in the piece. At the time, the Twitter character count.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. So
amazing.
It's a really weird piece. It was super fun to do. I wrote it just in a couple days, and it was like, why not, name it something that I can't put on my CV. I can put it on my website, but it's probably not the most professional thing to do. And the thing is, I've had to I've actually taught this piece a couple times because of this method that I want
Wow.
to teach composers. And one time I had to teach it to high schoolers, and I totally just had to like, it's titled something else. Don't worry about it. But here's this method.
You don't need to know the title.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh dear.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to look them up.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what do you wish performers knew about your perspective as the composer of the work they're playing?
What do I wish they knew? I think that in basically the bass flute solo in the middle of the piece, the entire piece stems from that. That was the first thing I wrote, and it was written very intuitively. I just kind of at the piano, just writing note heads down, no rhythms yet, just a melody. And that bass flute solo forms the theoretical backbone of the piece. Each section, and in the first like 3 minutes, there are something like 18 sections or something like that. Sometimes a section is as little as a measure. But I basically went through and used the notes of the bass flute to form the center of pitch sets that I was going to use for each of those sections. The bass flute melody comes back at the end. It is a derivation of the main melodic idea is used in kind of the 3/4 to the climax moment. So the bass flute is like everything to this piece. And that I think that is one thing I would want them to know about it. And the other thing is just to like kind of get into that headspace of like, imagine yourself as an octopus. How are the rhythms and the gestures like reminiscent of that kind of motion? And I think that one of the beautiful things about working with the flute quartet that I did was, they were kind of in on that, the whole octopus backstory for a long time, and they kind of, took what was on the page and made it even like heightened it, made it even more, stylized, because they kind of knew about that, like, oh, well, this kind of like jittery motion, but all that can like turn very graceful and just like the dichotomy of being jittery and graceful simultaneously, or juxtaposing them, or something like that. So they really took the notes on the page and then imbued it with that like spirit of the the motion and the behavior of the animal. So I think those are like the two probably most important things about the piece.
About writhe, unfurl, we're talking about.
Yes, about writhe, unfurl.
Yeah, that's really cool to know. We when we choose winners for the competition, it's member driven, and so we Elizabeth always finds judges to narrow things down in each category to finalists, and then the entire membership votes. And so we get that sound sample that you sent in with the score. We get to look at the score and the sound sample. And I mean, Pandemonium's a great quartet, so that's a great group of people to get to write for. The performing, I remember, was really dynamite, but I didn't know that backstory, so I'm excited to go back and listen again and watch the score.
Yeah,
it makes sense. It's an octopus.
Yeah, right.
Coming out of the bass flute. Yeah.
kind of very like very slinky in that moment. Very graceful, but also kind of not slithery, but you kind of get like it. I think slinky is maybe the best adjective for that bass flute solo. Like it just, it's well, yeah, it writhes in certain parts and unfurls in the rest.
Yeah. No, I think bass flute does slinky very well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I can with a lot of practice.
Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit and talking about other aspects of your career, because you have so many creative things going on. We're really interested to know more about adjective and about lexical tones. Can you tell us a little bit about your composer collective?
Yeah, absolutely. So the adjective new music started as an ensemble uh, with Jamie Lee Sampson and Andrew Martin Smith as the primary members of the ensemble. Then it turned into a publishing company. Um, Jamie Lee Sampson is a bassoonist. Andrew Martin Smith is a clarinetist. And Jamie has published a book about bassoon multiphonics that is kind of like the book if you
Yeah.
want to learn about bassoon multiphonics, and she has another one coming out about other bassoon extended techniques. So I think it was in 2015 or maybe even a little bit earlier. Jamie and Andrew did their masters, and then Andrew did a doctorate at Bowling Green State University. I did an undergrad at Bowling Green State University. We did not overlap. We actually didn't know each other.
Huh.
But in 2012, I was invited for the New Music Festival there for a percussion piece I had. And they assigned me a grad student as like if you have any questions, or here's the person you asked stuff to. And I was like, guys, I just left here like 4 years ago. Come on. But that's how I met Andrew Martin Smith and subsequently Jamie Lee Sampson. They're married. And that connection kind of started there. And then in 2015 or so, they were kind of thinking about starting a composer collective, and I was among the first group that was asked to join it. And I remember when we were Skyping talking about it, because at the time I was working and living in China. Before I got the job at Ohio University, I was a professor at Suzhou University, and in my last year, I was there for 4 years, and the last year I was there, I was also visiting professor at Shanghai Conservatory. And we were Skyping, and they were like, well, we're kind of, thinking about this. We're just kind of testing the waters. What do you think? And especially at the time, I was feeling very, very cut off from the compositional community, the new music community, being in China. And I was like, absolutely, I definitely want to be a part of this. I want, and they had mentioned kind of some other names, and there were other friends, that I knew. None of us were like super good friends, but we were all in each other's orbit, it seemed
Sure.
like.
Yeah, it happens.
And we started the collective, which was mostly about publishing. We were all technically self-published, but Adjective would be the distribution for our self-published scores. And when we were initially talked about it, we were like, oh, well, let's do other stuff other than publishing to get us out there. Maybe we have a blog where we all write articles or something. And they mentioned like, we're kind of thinking about maybe doing a podcast. I was like, I call podcasts. I'm doing the podcast. I want to do that. Because I'm an electronic music composer. Every part about the audio editing and all that kind of stuff, like that's right up my alley. And it was also, I felt like, a good way to kind of get to know my my own generation of composers again, who I'd kind of lost contact with. So when we started the podcast, the first batch of episodes were just members of the collective. And it's an interview show, so each composer that comes on as a guest, they choose 2 or 3 pieces of their own that they want to talk about. I research them, I ask them questions, we listen to the pieces, and then at the end we kind of dive into like, well, what made you become a musician? What made you become a composer? And the catch of it all is that they supply like 3 adjectives that kind of describe them. Adjective new music. It's called lexical tones just because we wanted to try and come up with something kind of English lit nerdy, and lexical tones are like tones that have meaning. So that that kind of it works in both levels for both music and, you know, and speech and everything. So after I got through the collective, I was like, well, I mean, this can't end. So I just started kind of contacting my friends. You know, I was like, oh, well, we went to school together. Yeah, come on, we'll talk about your music and stuff like that. And then it's not that I ran out of friends. It's just that I was like, you know, there are other people that I want to talk to. I had become aware of, you know, other people in kind of doing research for this. I was always kind of like listening for, you know, well, who might I want to talk to next? Who might I want to meet next? Amanda Feary is an Irish composer that I think she's on episode like 16 or something like that. And she was totally a cold call. I was like, hey, I heard this piece of yours. I really like it. Would you like to be on this show? And we can talk about it. And she said yes. And then from that point on, I would say the number of composers that I actually knew personally were maybe like 30% of who I had on. So it was a lot of like, and we've kind of taken a little bit of a hiatus with the podcast at the moment, just because we're all insanely busy as composers. Like it's a great problem to have. We're all like writing a ton of music, but at the same time, it's like, well, this also takes a lot of time away from that. So
Sure.
We're taking a little bit of a break right now, but we're on episode 183. So we're gonna get to, you know, 200 pretty soon. And it's just been a great way to like meet cool people, talk about cool music, and, you know, to have a platform where you can highlight the composers that you think are doing cool things, that you think are, you know, important to the discussion right now. It's, you know, it's been great. So at every season we kind of like highlighted certain people that we wanted to like target to try and like get them on. And it's honestly mostly been people that are plus 10, minus 10 years away from like our own age. Because, you know, if you're, yeah, sure, we could try and go after like John Adams or something like that, but I think enough has been written about him. You know, there are a lot of other people that haven't had the same exposure, especially younger composers. You know, because composition totally is a long game. Many people don't really get any sort of famous until they're like well into their careers. And it's like, no, a lot of people are doing really cool things right now. Let's talk about them too.
Yeah.
You know? So that's kind of the podcast. The collective has grown from we originally had 10 composers. Now I think we're around 20 or so. And you know, we all do very different things too, and that's kind of the cool thing about it. Like there are those collectives out there that they all have a kind of collective identity in a way. They all like, oh, we all write for band, or we all do this thing or that thing. And really, Adjective is not that. We do a lot of different things, which is kind of cool because, you know, when we're out in the world and talking to performers, you know, like I go see someone do a recital and they're like, yeah, I'm really looking for something new for my instrument or my ensemble. And I'm like, well, I don't have anything, but my friend over here who does this all the time, they have something. Why don't you talk to them? And that was kind of the spirit of it, was that, hey, we're in this together. We want to support each other. And that's really what we've done. We all bring something different to the table, and we all kind of help each other in different ways. You know, I've programmed many collective member pieces on the concerts I curate here at Ohio University. They've done the same for a lot of us. They brought ensembles to the collective who want to work with a great number of us. You know, so it's really about like, you know, forming a community of people who want to help each other.
Nice.
That is nice. There should be more of that.
There should be.
Robert, what one piece of advice do you wish you had heard as a young composer?
Ooh.
Wow. Okay. Man, there are a bunch that are kind of like circling through my head right now. And I kind of want to choose the right one, but can I give two?
Okay.
All right. Okay. Piece of advice number one, you're not Beethoven and you're never going to be. Just be yourself. It's fine. Like, I think a lot of us when we're younger composers, um, we tend to compare ourselves to the music we're being asked to study in most cases.
Yeah.
And we really don't get to, like, a music history, unless it is a very special, music history curriculum, it's never going to get to the present. Um, and usually in music theory, you don't get too close to the present either. There's just not quite enough time. There's another discussion here about, music, how music education should change in America, but we'll leave
That's a
that.
different podcast.
That's
We'll
a
have you
different
back.
podcast.
We can have you back.
That might be my podcast, actually.
Yeah.
But I think we have this tendency of like, oh, well, comparing yourself to people. Well, like, they did this when they were X number of years old. I haven't done anything. It's like, dude, you're not that. Just be yourself.
Yeah.
And you're not writing a masterpiece. And this is something that not a lot of people understand, I think, about these ridiculously famous old composers. Not every piece is a masterpiece. Like, they have plenty of stinkers in their catalog, and it's fine. We all will. So it's like, maybe in that same breath of the advice, like, don't be so precious with it. Like, just write it, just get it out there, get it performed, get the feedback, revise it, but don't put this pressure on yourself to think that, oh, I'm writing a masterpiece right now. Like, it just doesn't happen a lot. And there's so many outside factors that go into whether it's good, whether the piece, once it leaves your pen or your computer or whatever, if it will actually achieve that have nothing to do with you. So it's like, just be yourself as a musician, and remember that you're not writing a masterpiece. Basically, like, it's not to say that it can't become that, but at the moment you don't have to think about it like that.
Right.
Okay, the other piece of advice is that I think a lot of people place a lot of value on intuitive writing for whatever reason. Like, there's this kind of prestige of, oh, I just did this completely intuitively. I didn't use theory at all. And it's like, well, okay, that's cool. That's great, But there's also, like, music theory is kind of your friend. It teaches you a lot of stuff that you can use, like, you can reverse engineer. And don't be afraid to, let something else other than your intuition take the wheel for a second. It can yield really positive results. There are like 7 more. Like,
those were great.
But I'll save them. I'll save them for my podcast.
Excellent. So we wanted to end tonight with a little bit more getting to know you, and also a little bit of research for us. Tell us about 3 pieces you're listening to right now.
Well, I'm listening to a lot of orchestral music right now because I'm teaching orchestration at the moment. But I mean, the Rite of Spring is never that far from my my Spotify playlist. It's one of the pieces I love more than anything else. And actually, before I was listening to Writhe, Unfurl again, just to kind of, get back in the headspace in preparation for this. And as I was listening to it, I was like, wow, that was a really Rite of Spring moment right there. So, it's never far from my consciousness. 2 more pieces of stuff that I'm listening to right now. Honestly, I don't really listen to a ton of classical or contemporary music if I'm not preparing for a podcast or not at a festival or something like that. I listen to a ton of pop music.
Sure. That counts.
Yeah.
What you
Okay.
got?
Oh, she wants some recommendations? I got
You
some.
get two more. We got Rite of Spring, and then the next one to follow.
This is gonna be so weird to follow.
We like weird.
Okay. Bjork is putting out a podcast right now where she goes through her each album and kind of like talks about the inspirations behind them and stuff like that. So I would say one Bjork song that I love is called Unravel.
Okay.
It's off of her album Homogenic. And I think about it a lot when I'm writing, actually, because it has this like kind of electronic texture that I don't know what it is about it, but it sounds like the process of unraveling. It's just so it's so evocative. So Bjork Unravel, and then all right, I gotta go something relatively new.
Stravinsky, Bjork.
Yeah,
Love it.
Who's getting the third spot?
it's getting the third spot. Man, it's hard to do this without looking at Spotify, but you know what? I just listened to a concert, a virtual concert that I heard a really, really nice piece on, and it was actually by Andrew Martin Smith, one of the Adjective founders.
Mhm.
And it's a piece he wrote for himself for demi, clarinet, and electronics, which
Okay.
I'm trying to remember it was called Pathways.
Pathway.
If you don't know, demi clarinet is where you take just the bottom half of the clarinet and it actually fits into the upper joint. So you're only playing the bottom half of the clarinet, and you play it like one-handed, but since your left hand is free, you can do like cool like wah-wah effects with it, and it's like very microtonal, like, and you only have so many pitches available to you. But he's written several of these pieces for demi clarinet, and I thought the new one was really interesting, being paired with electronics. And yeah, I'll say that one for the third one. That's like the most recent thing I've listened to.
I love that.
Amazing.
That sounds like something Bjork would put on an album. So I feel like
totally.
we've come full circle.
Actually, her new album is like a lot of clarinets. It's like a clarinet choir, like 5 bass clarinets and something like that. It's like slowly coming out. She's released like 6 songs from it so far. But,
Here we
I'm a
go.
little jealous.
Thank
This
you.
was great. This was so
Yeah.
much fun.
yeah,
Thanks
this
for
was a
joining
lot of
us.
fun. Yeah, thanks for all your questions, and yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com. Support for this podcast comes in part from the Flute New Music Consortium. FNMC serves as a catalyst for collaborations between contemporary flutists and composers by commissioning new works, amplifying select recent works, organizing simultaneous premieres, and encouraging repeat performances of all FNMC-sponsored works. To learn more, visit www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com today.